the Steam Deck, once again. This time, however, inside this video, it is not alone. We actually have an entire repertoire of other handhelds here with varying power, portability and worth depending on the individual. I unfortunately don't have every single handheld under the sun, as I don't earn a mobile number as my monthly income, but the main ones are here, and things like the Switch 2 and the 3DS, which we will cover, can be swapped out for their predecessors should they suit your tastes more. In this video, we are going to discuss the ROG Ally X, the Steam Deck, the Nintendo Switch 2, the 3DS, the PSP, the PS Vita, and, a bonus entry, a simple smartphone. As I say, I don't have every single handheld in the world, but there is a reason why I own specifically these ones, which we will get into in a little bit. These are the main handhelds I see strewn about the interwebs on Reddit amongst enthusiasts of the handheld gaming industry, and as you can clearly see, I 100% fit into this category as well, and I would like to say that I'm fairly well versed in technology and can properly articulate what makes these devices a fantastic choice, even in the big year of 2025.
That's obviously more for the PSP, the Vita and the 3DS. The others, like the Steam Deck, are obviously more modern and will handle almost anything you throw at them. Within reason, of course.
Before we really get into this video, I just want to apologise for how long it's been since I last uploaded to this channel. Life has been really coming at me fast lately, and so a lot of my time has been occupied with other responsibilities, and as you can imagine, my energy has been a lot more non-existent than it usually is. Hopefully, another video covering the Steam Deck and other handhelds will bang like they usually do, and will make up for that lost time. I don't really know which to start with, so we're actually just going to go with the oldest first, and that would be this little boy, the PlayStation Portable. Jesus Christ. That would be this little boy, the PlayStation Portable. Got it that time. Now, what can I say about the PSP that hasn't been said a million times before by a million other people? This was one of the most influential handheld consoles of all time, being Sony's first foray into the handheld gaming market, even giving Nintendo, the reigning champions of this market with their Nintendo DS, a run for their money. This console was advertised as a PS2 but on the go. And now, there are definitely quite a few games that didn't feel up to the usual high standards of their PS2 counterparts, maybe due to the fact that this thing lacked a second analog stick, plus an L2 and R2 button. This obviously means that a lot of games had to sacrifice quite a lot of what made the home console counterparts great, which just isn't that ideal. Either that, or they had to jerry-rig the camera controls to some bullshit like the face buttons. I'm looking at you, Call of Duty Roads to Victory. For the games that either did proper workarounds for the lack of controls or worked fine on the device without having to compromise much, a lot of them are genuinely god tier. Honestly, some of my favourite games of all time originated on the PSP. Some of these include Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, my first ever Grand Theft Auto game, Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, a full-on Ratchet & Clank experience for on-the-go gaming, and Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, one of the main entries in the series that people don't really see because it's not a numbered entry. Also, Gran Turismo, one of the best looking games on this system. It still looks good to this day. And that is just a few of the amazing games on this device. The fact that this thing can fit in your pocket as well, like, it is so small. Look at the size of my hand compared to this thing. Like, you could easily fit this in your pocket. Even girls or women that have no pockets on their clothes could probably fit this somewhere. I should have thought about what I just said there. That's not a good sense. Also, the fact that you can play full-on GTA games on this. Let me show you. Yeah, fucking look at this. Right, I am insistent that Liberty City Stories has the best theme tune alongside GTA 4. This theme is incredible. Right, look at this. Like, even though this game, like, this console lacks a second analog stick, and it does run a bit dodgy, like at some points, especially when you're looking towards the city, this is a full-on Grand Theft Auto game. And like, it actually fits into the story. This is a prequel to GTA 3. Tony Cipriani is a character in Grand Theft Auto 3, and he features as the main protagonist in this. Like, it's actually amazing at the power this thing had. Jesus Christ, I am bad at this. But I remember, I used to play this all the time. Like, my dad had his PSP, he bought it home, like, when I was, like, 7, he bought it off some guy at his work, and, like, he had this, and he used to let me play it without my mum knowing. She didn't let me play 18s, and Jesus Christ, this was perfect. Absolutely brilliant. I love it. I genuinely still cannot believe the black magic Sony pulled in order to get this thing to run as well as it did. Did I mention that this thing also does movies? Yeah, this little ass thing is a true multimedia beast. Granted, there are some sacrifices on movies and games due to the fact that they use these tiny-esque UMD discs with little to no data on them, but this is meant to be something you just take out and play, not necessarily use as a primary multimedia games console, although this could be fully used as such with a few caveats, obviously. Also, there were a few licensed softcore porn UMD videos released, which I just think is kind of crazy. You know, why the fuck were there porn videos released for this? Finally, you can now fulfill your gooning addiction while standing in line at McDonald's. I think one of the best things about this little beast, though, is the fact that you can natively play PS1 games on this. While I was only about 3 once this thing came out, I imagine the idea of playing PS1 games on the go, back in 2004 mind you, was just an incredible concept. This isn't my primary PSP. This is actually my primary PSP. As you can see, the buttons are delightfully yellowed, and the screen is starting to show its signs of scratching and wear, you know, like there are a few problems with this one, but it still works perfectly. Like, it is still a perfect PSP. This was the one that my dad bought home all those years ago. He gave it to me a few years ago because he, you know, he's grown out of it, he never really used it, and so I inherited it, and I have loved this ever since. You know, this has been in my family for, I've just spoiled a bit, fuck. This has been in my family for, well, since I was 7, and I'm 24 now. That is a number of years. I can't be asked to do the math because I am reading and I can't multitask. Still though, this was the very PSP that I used to take into college every day when I was, what, 16, 17? So definitely getting on a bit now, about 7 years ago. And if, you know, it was a slow day and we didn't really have much work, or I'd finished all my work, I would just pop this thing out and I started playing fucking Metal Gear Solid 1. A full-on PS1 game in this tiny little package in like 2004. Wild. Obviously, if I got bored, I could easily just swap to some bullshit like Gran Turismo or Ratchet and Clank. You know, this thing is a fucking beast, and it is no wonder why it sold so well and is still so highly renowned amongst enthusiasts in the gaming industry. Also, I want to say, these things last fucking ages. I know I've already gone on a bit of a tirade about how I've had this one since I was like 7, but I haven't changed. Like, the only part I've changed in this was the screen, and that's because I accidentally stood on it once, and I didn't realise it'd fallen out of my bed. But other than that, that is the only part I've replaced. And even after the screen replacement, which I swapped with another PSP 1000 screen, it works fine. Like, it works absolutely brilliantly. Every single part of this functions incredibly well. And this is 21 years old, mind you. This is the original PSP 1000, 2004. How crazy is that it still works as well as it does? Word of warning though, if you do have a PSP 1000 through 3000, I would recommend checking your batteries every now and then, because the batteries on this thing are renowned for bloating without you sort of knowing, and obviously can be quite a fire hazard. So if you value your PSP or the space you are currently living in, I would recommend taking these out and like leaving them to one side or something where you know where they are if you don't plan on using them for a little while, or at least checking them regularly to see if there are any signs of degradation, because obviously you don't want your house going up it. Now, before I go over why this may be a decent solution in 2025, I just want to discuss the various different models of PSP. The PSP had 5 different models in total, these two being the most original PSP models, being the PSP 1000. This thing, as I say, is honestly still a beast. I love this thing so much. You know, it's a little thicker and less powerful than the other models, but you wouldn't really notice it. Also, the rear of the PSP 1000, as you can see, is angled slightly and allows for slightly better ergonomics as you can grip onto it a bit better, which, if you know me and watch the previous Steam Deck videos, you'll know is an extremely important thing for me. The PSP 2000 being the first revision of the PSP.
Obviously, I don't have images for these, so I'm just going to use ones I shamelessly stole off Google Images again. So, thank you, Google. Thank you so much.
This was a pretty decent improvement all around. The RAM was actually increased in capacity from 32 megabytes to 64 megabytes. Also, can I just say how amazing it is that we used to run full games on 32 megabytes of RAM? Like nowadays, I have 1,000 times that in my computer, 32 gigabytes, and I still notice performance issues. It just goes to show that optimization goes a long way. The screen was also upgraded in the 2000, allowing for less ghosting, which I admit is definitely an issue for the PSP 1000, but like with most things, after 15 to 20 minutes of continuous play, you aren't really going to notice it. The PSP 2000 has been made a lot lighter and slimmer as well, which might actually be the clincher for someone looking to invest. It is a handheld portable console after all, and so weight and slimness is going to be very important. Even though the 1000 is still light and slim, like, it might still be too much for someone with small hands or someone that has only just come out of their mother's womb. The PSP 1000 is said to have a bit better build quality as well, as like I say, it is a bit bulkier, but while I never owned a 2000 or 3000, I can definitely say that this thing is still going after God knows how many years and has seen an awful lot of action. The last major change is the fact that the 2000 added a TV out option for if you wanted for some reason to play these low-res ass games on a bigger screen. Obviously this wasn't in the era of 60-inch flat screen OLEDs and was more meant for the smaller CRT TVs of the era. The 3000 was the second revision of the PSP, further improving the formula by making the screen, arguably the most important part of a handheld gaming device, much more vibrant whilst also making it brighter. A controversial change with the screen though was that they also added a slight interlacing effect, which some people love and some people hate. The ghosting was however reduced even more on this model, so if that is important for you, then you know really which model to go for. An internal microphone was added for this model as well. I personally can't see many use cases for this, but it's there for the crowd that wants it. Now, the weirdest addition in the PSP lineup was introduced in 2009 with the PSP Go. The PSP Go was basically a complete physical overhaul for the device, with digital content becoming more and more prominent, the release of the PS3 and the Xbox 360, Sony overhauled the PSP to be the most portable console at the time, whilst also adhering to the latest trend of digital downloading. This model was extremely small, reducing the size of the screen down from 4.3 inches down to 3.8. If you are me, however, you know that 3.8 is perfectly superfluous for any task. Yes, I mean any task. You may also notice that the controls seem to be missing, but don't worry, Sony actually thought of that. You can slide the back of the PSP Go downwards to reveal the controls of the device. Due to the size and location of the controls, however, this can be incredibly uncomfortable to hold for extended periods of time. But again, if this is something you're going to play on the bus for 10 minutes, then it's not really a huge deal. The main controversial change of this device, however, was the fact that the UMD drive was completely removed, opting for digital-only games. This was quite upsetting for a lot of fans back in the day, but due to the way that the PSP has grown over the years, this model has actually become quite sought after, and is fetching fairly high prices online. I really want one of these now, like, look at them, they're just so cute. The final model of the PSP E1000, or more commonly known as the PSP Street, was released only 4 months before the PS Vita was released. This was cheap as hell back in the day, being Sony's answer to budget handheld gaming, and served as a final hurrah for the PSP before it finally became obsolete. This variant was a lot more stripped back in certain ways by removing the stereo speakers in favour of a single mono speaker, whilst also removing all Wi-Fi functionality. The screen on this was also less vibrant than even the 1000 model. The UMD drive did make a comeback though on this model, which is nice, and also takes up the entire back of the device. This means that the battery is now non-removable, and by extension, harder to replace and repair. Out of the UMD capable PSPs, this model is functionally the worst of the bunch, but still more than serviceable. This model of PSP was the first one I actually owned myself, before my dad gave me this one. Aesthetically though, this thing is by far my favourite. I know that you can get some really cool colours for the 1000 through 3000 models, but this thing just looks so clean. It's the only PSP model with a matte finish over a glossy one, and so it's already fairly unique over the other models. This was probably due to the fact that plastic was cheaper to produce, however. As I say, this was the first model I actually owned myself, and so I carried this almost everywhere, and it was perfectly fine before I sold it a few years later. I really do have a soft spot for this model. If there was any way I could include all of the bells and whistles of the regular non-budget variants into this, I fully would. I love the look of it. Still, What we learn from this console is that it is incredibly good at what it does. The battery lasts ages, it plays tons of games from actual GTA games on the go to almost all PS1 classic titles, so the library of this thing is really massive. And that's a real high point for anyone looking to get this device, so is it worth it in 2025? Honestly, absolutely yes. If not for the reasons I've described here, then for the hackability of it. This is why I still have the 1000 model as a primary PSP driver, because it's just so easy to hack. I believe it's fairly easy still, but the 2000 model and onwards are slightly harder to hack due to Sony obviously making changes behind the scenes to prevent piracy and whatnot where possible. This thing honestly took me about half an hour to fully jailbreak, and while I did need a PC to initially do it, I can do everything from the PSP from now on. It is so brainless at how easy it is on this, it is actually wild considering what can be done with it. I won't go over everything that can be done here as there are genuinely tons of different things, but I do recommend this video here from Bringus Studios. I'll leave it in the description below if you want to go and watch it, but it's about modding the PSP. He goes truly in depth of what can be done with a modded PSP. You know, you can install stuff like cheats for existing games, get every single PSP games, have emulators with games included, and have certain homebrew games. Some poor fucker even ported Minecraft to this thing. For a 20-year-old console that is already at a power disadvantage due to the fact that it's a portable console, this thing holds up surprisingly well in the year of 2025. It only got better since the introduction of homebrew apps as well, and we will probably continue this trajectory with the more that are developed for it. Definitely something you should get if you want to dip your toes into the handheld market, or even gaming in general. These can be picked up so cheap secondhand, even with a few games if you prefer physical media. As I say though, jailbreaking these things is easy, and so you won't have a shortage of games at all. Genuinely a fantastic console in almost every respect. I know it's extremely outdated by modern standards, but there are so many good games on here. But if you're new to the hobby, maybe playing older games will help you appreciate the greats instead of being like the average kid that thinks Red Dead 2 is the worst game, with Fortnite taking the best slot. Now, if we stick to the theme of going from the oldest to the newest, our good pal, the 3DS, is up next. As we mentioned prior, this could easily be switched out with the DS if you have an R4 card, or the DSi as I mentioned, because you can hack it to include all the goodies and whatnot. The 3DS, and by extension the new 3DS line of consoles, are the best you can get for a DS type console. This is because you can obviously get a much larger library, as you can have both DS and 3DS games, and because it is the more popular choice, the things that you can do with a hacked 3DS far surpass what can be done with a regular DSi or DS, as developers will support this more. Regardless, before we get more onto the homebrew aspect, let's go over why this thing was still incredibly successful. The 3DS came along in early 2011 when... Fuck me. I forgot this was here. I forgot this was my fucking theme. I'm still in a dream, Snake. The 3DS came along in early 2011 when the DS was starting to quickly become obsolete, and as its namesake suggests, the 3DS came packaged with a proper 3D filter for its screen, without the need of any outside peripherals. This made a lot of games released for the system, especially early on, and first-party releases looked like they truly had depth. This ended up working remarkably well for some games, whereas others, especially later down the line, the feature ended up making things either look worse, or the feature was completely unused. The 3D feature was very double-edged, however. You know, it was amazing when you turned it on for the first time and saw just how magic games that fit in your pocket can look, but after 5 to 10 minutes, my head started getting a horrible pain that would require me to at least turn the 3D feature off. I often started getting such a headache that I would have to put the entire 3DS down and go for a nap to clear the pain. It was that bad. This obviously makes me not want to use a feature like that, especially if I'm out and about. The last thing I'd want to do is to be out and then have a blistering headache for the rest of the day. This is a common complaint a lot of people had about the 3D feature, and so most of them, like myself, flat out refuse to use the feature as the games work absolutely fine without it. It just feels like more of a novelty that they tried to push instead of an actual critical feature. Regardless of the 3D feature controversy, this device was absolutely fucking incredible. This was the first 3DS I got, and I picked it up for 30 quid at a boot fair about 4 to 5 years ago. Long after the 3DS became obsolete and well into the Switch One's life cycle. Still, when this device came out, I could never afford one, and so it always just lingered as a nice idea in the back of my mind. I remember once I had a dream in which I had one. You know, the dream felt so real that I can now remember certain details quite vividly. I also remember that once I awoke, I immediately went searching for my non-existent 3DS and felt genuine disappointment once I realised that I dreamt it. When I say I wanted one of these, boy, do I mean it. I had a regular DS Lite at the time, and whilst that console was, and still is, absolutely fantastic for what it is, I was getting the biggest feeling of FOMO when I saw my friends rock up to the school disco with one of these bad boys. I remember really wanting to play Mario Kart 7. It looked so incredibly fun, and the graphics just blew me away, especially when I compared them to Mario Kart DS. The glider gameplay looked so amazing and novel, and I just felt so sad that I couldn't experience that when it was still new and, like, cool. As time went on, however, that overwhelming desire to own one of these started to drift away as new things came and went, until I finally managed to get one of these for cheap around 2020 to 2021. As I say, I managed to get one of these for 30 quid at a boot fair, which for those who are uninitiated, are places you can go where people take their cars and set up a stall in a field full of old stuff they no longer want, often full of stuff that they don't really know the value of, and so they underprice them with stuff like this. Honestly, a really good place to go for good deals. All I had to do once I purchased it was insert an SD card, and I was ready to mod it. Like with the PSP, installing custom firmware really opens up the possibilities of what can be done. You can overclock specific components to squeeze more performance out of your system, you can install games for both the DS and the 3DS, but also get emulators for tons of older consoles that you could also get games for. For me, £30 was an absolute steal for that experience. Even going back to play this every few months or so, I'm reminded of how glad I am for having bit the bullet on buying one. The very night I bought this, however, I installed MK7 as well as a ton of other DS and 3DS games I either wanted to play or no longer owned, and, you know, I managed to get them to work. Bear in mind, I had a PS5 and a PC at this point, and I spent over a week just chilling and playing on this whenever I wasn't playing with my friends. I played so much Mario Kart 7 that I actually burned myself out of wanting to play any more of it. Plus, I went back and played through all of the DS Pokemon titles, as well as the 3DS ones I'd never played before. I loved every second of it, and whilst I can easily emulate 3DS games and have a more visually appealing experience on another device, I will never do so, as playing on this is just so charming. I need to stop talking about how much I love this device and actually, you know, talk about why this device is as good as it is. Because the 3DS is a portable device that people would obviously take out and about, Nintendo really went in on the whole social aspect of this device, allowing for many more ways for you to play and communicate with your friends as well as strangers who also carried one of these around. My favourite feature of this being Street Pass. Street Pass was a charming little feature that idly worked as you went about your day-to-day life whilst outside. Essentially, it worked in a way that whenever two 3DSs would come into close proximity with each other, both users would share me and game data to each other. This was a charming feature that told you who else was like you and potentially who had similar interests. Obviously, this feature has been used less and less over the years due to the fact that barely anyone who isn't a weird fucker like myself actually carries one of these around. But if anything, it actually makes me a lot happier when I get that rare notification of a Street Pass interaction. What I'm trying to say is that this device was more than just a gaming device. This thing was really a social device as well and served its purpose so incredibly well. I remember when I went bowling for a friend's birthday party when I was about 10 or 11, and he brought his brand new 3DS that he got for his birthday. There was another group of lads on the opposite side of our specific area, so it was about 5 or 6 feet away, and they also had a guy that brought a 3DS, and the way that they connected and how easy it was so unreal. You know, this device really closed gaps between a lot of people, and I and many others rightfully respect it tons for that. I better move on to the games before I get sucked into personal anecdotes again. Going back to the PSP again slightly, I remember a lot of people saying that the DS was better and others saying that the PSP was better. I personally sit on the latter side, although I still love both with my heart. This is mainly due to the games library that was present for both of these devices. I feel like the PSP focused a lot more on games that could theoretically be considered home console titles, focusing on building those already existing IPs that exist on those consoles, whereas the DS focused a lot more on sort of one and done type games that fit a different type of niche. It's a hard thing to describe as they both still have fantastic titles, but I always felt that the PSP had titles with bigger scope over the usually smaller type games that the DS worked well with. This does not work to the DS's detriment, however, as there are still tons of titles on that system that work incredibly well with the hardware presented to us. I just always felt like the games fit different slots within the industry. I suppose an easier way of describing it is that the handheld games and home console games for the longest time were different due to major differences in hardware. The DS, I feel personally, stuck to that tradition a lot more, whereas I think the PSP tried to bridge that gap a bit more. I could be way off the mark, but that's just how I feel. As I say, however, that does not work in detriment to the DS or 3DS, as there are still tons of brilliant games on both systems that still hold a lot of weight today. If anything, I think it actually makes the 3DS a bit more unique than the PSP in a sense, as the games and the way you experience them is a lot more tailored to the hardware instead of trying to have a home console-like experience that the PSP tried to emulate. I suppose something that backs this theory is the fact that Sony advertised the PSP and the PS Vita as home consoles but portable, whereas Nintendo treat their home consoles and handhelds very differently, with both filling different areas within the market. At least until the Switch came along, but we will get into that shortly. Now, like the PSP, I want to quickly go over the different 3DS models and how they evolved over their life cycle. The astute of you may have actually noticed that this isn't a regular 3DS, but in fact a 3DS XL, the first gen one to be exact. Basically, there is no difference in the regular 3DS over the XL apart from the fact that the battery in the XL was slightly bigger and the overall size of the screens were bigger as well. One thing to note is that despite having a bigger screen in the XL, the resolution was exactly the same between both models, and so the pixel density is a fair bit lower on the XL compared to the regular size 3DS, and so you may notice a bit more aliasing in some games, but for the most part, you really aren't going to care. The next model released in this line was the Nintendo 2DS, an affordable, more child-friendly option for starting out in the 3DS ecosystem. This model had a few glaring drawbacks, however, notably again, as its namesake describes, the 3D system is no longer present. It seems Nintendo took the concerns on board when the 3DS released, and decided that removing that feature entirely would be a better option to protect the eyes of children that didn't know any better. Obviously as well, the hinge design was completely removed, instead favouring a more simple block of plastic akin to that of the Game Boy. These are apparently a lot better for people with smaller hands, and so is still quite a popular choice considering you can play all 3DS and regular DS games on there. I always hated the look of this model, however, because to me, the DS and 3DS are nice and portable clamshell designed consoles. Taking that away, whilst understandable considering they were aiming for a more budget, child-centered audience, is far from my style, and I will always prefer this design. Moving on, in 2014 and 15, the 3DS arsenal of devices got upgraded a decent chunk with the new 3DS lineup, including the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL. These devices made some decent changes, including some new controls, like the C-Stick that could be used in some new titles with more intricate camera controls, and the addition of ZL and ZR buttons on the back. There are only a few new exclusive titles released for these models, but there really weren't many. Only a handful of games really supported these new controls, but I suppose if you are really dying to play Minecraft on the 3DS, then you will have to get one of these newer models. These upgrades did come with some sweet hardware improvements as well, allowing for better performance and much higher loading speeds for certain games. The 3D effect was also changed and improved slightly, allowing for the front-facing camera to track your face and adjust the 3D effect on the fly to improve quality when not looking properly and directly at the screen. These models are generally considered to be the definitive 3DS models, as the upgrades in both external and internal hardware are the best the lineup ever saw. There is another model that was released about 3 to 4 months after the release of the Nintendo Switch, however, that being the new Nintendo 2DS XL. This would be the final revision of the 3DS line of consoles, with it acting a bit like the PSP Street in a sense, serving as a final hurrah for the 3DS and allowing for the best way to play 3DS games in the highest quality, whilst also on a budget. While the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL are the best 3DS models to buy as they come pre-packaged with the 3D effect, the new 2DS XL is still a beautiful console. This had all the hardware improvements that the previous new 3DS consoles have, except once again the 3D mode was completely removed. The clamshell design does also return for this model, however, allowing for that true DS experience whilst being frugal. I personally think, however, that this model looks the best. The front camera being on the hinge, leaving the top screen to be a lot cleaner, just looks so nice to me. When I decide to finally get one of the new 3DS models, that will be the one I get, as it just looks so incredibly clean, and I personally don't see a point in the 3D effect. Some of you may be wondering, is there a point to getting any of these 3DS models in 2025? Absolutely! As I mentioned earlier, emulating these games is easy on a lot of hardware nowadays, whether it be a phone, a PC, or even a VR headset. But there is just something about playing DS games on native hardware that always feels more natural and gives me more of a novel feeling. This is the same for any console. It's always better to experience it on the native hardware, as that is what it is made for, and so usually that's where the definitive experience lies. The DS, I think, is the prime example of this, however, as with an emulator it has to emulate two screens, which always feels a bit off, especially when playing some games that require the screens to be in the different orientation. The way the two screens interact with each other is also something that can really only be properly enjoyed and experienced on the native hardware. Regardless, these can be really cheap nowadays, even if you decide to cheap out and get a regular 2DS. You can also really easily mod these with custom firmware and add tons of very unique games and themes and whatnot. While I prefer the PSP overall for what it was, I honestly think that the 3DS line of consoles is a far better shout to get in the year of 2025. Obviously you could do what I do and have both, but if you had to choose one over the other, I think this is a better deal if you want totally unique games. Continuing on with our theme, we have the next console in our list, the PS Vita. Now, the PS Vita unfortunately wasn't received the best when it was first released in 2012. There were a plethora of reasons as to why this console was a failure for both Sony and the consumers. The console itself was quite highly priced for the time, being just over £200 or $249 for the Wi-Fi model and just under £250 or $299 for the 3G model. Now, you may be thinking, 3G in a gaming handheld? Well, why would they need that? And that is a very good question, and the reasoning for that is for what they wanted the Vita to actually be. They wanted it to compete with not only Nintendo and their 3DS, but with the rising popularity of smartphones, they also wanted to compete with Android and Apple to have a sort of mix between a multimedia handheld and a regular smartphone. This was already a ballsy play from their end, as there are a lot of things you have to cover if you even want to get close to that sort of experience. Unfortunately, the 3G feature was only really used for a small amount of social features, as wasn't really meant for anything more than that. Sony had big plans for it from my knowledge and research, but it fell very short, making it a bit of a redundant feature. This difference in model can be a real decision maker for modders though, as the 3G variant has something on the inside of the Vita which can be replaced with storage, allowing you to have tons of storage for homebrew without actually compromising the use of game cards. We will touch upon that a little bit later, however, because I don't really want to get ahead of myself just yet. Whilst the PSP did use proprietary storage, the console was bundled with said storage, and it was also the same type of storage used in a few other Sony products like cameras and whatnot, and so some buyers might have already had some lying around, plus they weren't as expensive to buy as they had already been around in the market for quite some time. The Vita, however, decided to use another type of proprietary storage altogether, something that only the Vita could use. And the consoles themselves rarely, if ever, came bundled with these storage cards. Because of this, you would obviously have to buy one alongside your new console. The worst part is that Sony, obviously the sole manufacturer of these cards, really hiked the price of these things. A 4GB card was priced at £18, which is just egregious. 4 gigs back then was a pitiful amount of data, and so one of two things would happen. You would buy one, realise that it isn't enough, and so have to buy another 4GB card or upgrade to a bigger storage size, or bite the bullet and immediately just get an 8GB, 16GB or 32GB. All of these are woefully low amounts of storage for 2012 and what they wanted you to be able to do with the Vita. Not to mention that the 8GB storage card was £32, with the 16GB going up to £45 and the 32 gigs rounding us off at a whopping £60. That is as much as a whole ass game just for storage. Just for reference, that is over £86 or 113 American dollars in today's money, which is just absurdly high. I spent just over double this for 16 terabytes of storage, by the way. Just goes to show how poor this was at the time. The concept of buying a £200 console in 2012 without storage is bad enough, but then you have to slap on at least £18 for the minimum amount, which won't suit you for long, or you pay at least an extra $45 for a decent amount, which is just awful. This led to people either not buying the console or returning it after realising that the storage was not only included, but also costs a mortgage worth of money to even buy. This was, in my opinion, the main reason as to why this system failed, as this affected every single user instead of some of the shortcomings that this device had that may have only affected a smaller percentage. You may be able to get away with not having any storage if you only played physical games, but considering digital games were being really pushed in this new era of gaming, and the fact that some of the physical games required memory cards anyway, it just seemed real scummy that Sony didn't bother factoring that into the price of the units they sold. Unfortunately, due to poorer sales than they would have hoped, they seemed to distance themselves from the Vita after a short while, opting to almost fully cut first-party support after only a year. They decided that they would be better off focusing all their money and energy into the PS4, with that releasing only a year after the Vita came out. This meant that those that purchased the Vita were just stuck with barely any amazing first-party games, and instead stuck with, admittedly, a fairly large library of third-party ports and releases. This isn't to say that the PS Vita didn't have any brilliant first-party games when looking back on it. There were so many amazing and fun titles like Killzone Mercenary, Uncharted The Golden Abyss and Uncharted Fight for Fortune, Gravity Rush and Wipeout 2048. These games are absolutely incredible, but that is basically 50% of the entire major first-party lineup. There just weren't many major first-party releases for this, and it honestly sucks. As I say, however, the third-party games were actually pretty good, with ports of the first 3 Ratchet & Clank games being put on there, as well as Metal Gear Solid 2, Persona 4, Terraria, Minecraft, and the God of War collection, to name a few. Whilst these versions almost universally ran worse than their console counterparts, being able to play fully fledged console games from only a generation prior, like the PSP with its PS1 backwards compatibility, was just incredible. Metal Gear Solid 2, Ratchet & Clank 1 and Persona 4 Golden are 3 of my favourite games of all time, and so being able to play them in this tiny-ass thin device is just honestly incredible. The library isn't nearly as filled as, say, the PSP's library, but there are still truly some gems to be had here that you'd otherwise be missing if you pass this console up. Like with the other consoles we've mentioned today, there were a couple of different models for the PS Vita. It doesn't have nearly as many as the others, having only 2, but these 2 models are definitely quite a bit different. The 2 different models are the PSP 1000 and the other is called the PSP 2000, or as they are more commonly known as, the Vita Fat and the Vita Slim respectively. The one I have here is a Vita 2000 or the Slim variant, but I have owned a 1000 model before and so I do know some of the differences firsthand. The first major difference is where they earn their titles, Fat and Slim. The 1000 model is certainly one chunky lad and weighs in a hefty 260 grams. That may not sound like much, but for something that is in this tiny sort of package with lackluster ergonomics, you will really feel that weight a lot quicker. The Slim model, getting its name from the fact that it is obviously very thin and markedly thinner than the 1000, weighs in at only 219 grams. Again, not the lightest, but this is definitely a lot better for a portable console. The ergonomics on this are slightly worse in my opinion though, as there is a lot less heft on the back for you to grip onto. Your mileage may vary however, so, go with whatever suits you. The main thing you may notice that has changed in the 2000 model is actually the screen. The screen is a bit different here, being actually a lot worse in a sense. The 1000 model actually shipped by default with an OLED display, which was actually really nice and unexpected considering that the flagship competition device at the time, the 3DS XL, had 2 LCD displays instead. The OLED did and still does look incredible on games released for the console and can be a real selling point for someone looking to buy one. You may be wondering though, how could the revision be worse in this regard? And the answer to this question is that the OLED that was present in the 1000 was actually changed in favour of an LCD for the 2000 like the one we have here. The screen is still more than serviceable on this and is perfectly adequate for a system like this, it's just a bit shit that the OLED got removed. I imagine it has something to do with the manufacturing costs however, therefore lowering market prices and opening this failing console up to a wider audience. The 2000 also has a different charging port, opting to go with a more fairly standard micro USB connector instead of the proprietary connector that was present on the 1000 model. A far better change in my opinion. It allows me to use several cables and I can easily replace them at a much lower cost to both my wallet and my sanity should I need to. Those are basically the only major differences outside the overall look and aesthetic of the device. I would say get a 1000 if you want to get one, mainly in part for that beautiful OLED screen, but at the end of the day it is a matter of preference and what features stick out to you. In my opinion, the 2000 does look a lot cleaner and more premium compared to the 1000, but again, that is just my personal opinion. I know I'm probably in the minority on that. What is with me preferring the cheaper and more shit models of consoles? First the PSP, then the 3DS, and now this. There's definitely something wrong with me, man, I swear. Still, with regards to why this device is currently here and why I'm currently talking about it, we still need to talk about if it's still worth it in 2025. You may be wondering, well, considering everything bad you've had to say about it, probably not, right? Well, that answer is quite the contrary, because I absolutely recommend getting one of these. You may now be wondering, why the hell would you recommend that if you've just spent ages shitting on it? And that is a very fair question. The reason I would recommend this is for a reason that I mentioned earlier, and is also applicable to the other two devices we've discussed. Mods. Modding on this thing is so incredibly simple and worthwhile that it is honestly a no-brainer. This device has truly come into its own over the last few years and only seems to be getting more worthwhile. With ease, I can install any Vita game directly from and to the system, but I can also install a built-in PSP emulator called Adrenaline that allows me to play any PSP game and by extension PS1 game. It is honestly insane the amount of games you can get for this thing, games that feel like they should be fully fledged console games. You can also install a shit ton of homebrew ads that, like the PSP and the 3DS, allow you to alter some clocks for both the CPU and the GPU to squeeze a bit extra performance where it might be needed. This, along with the fact that you can also get homebrew games and apps on this, is like a really good selling point. Hell, I have, can you see that? Vita cord. I have fucking Discord on this. I can sign into this with my Discord account, message my friends through the Vita with them being none the wiser. It's brilliant. Would you want to do so? I mean, probably not, but can you do so? Absolutely. And that's why I love this thing. The homebrew scene is so vast and it's only growing by the day. You know, there is bound to be something that takes your fancy. Also, I just want to show you something here. This down here, this little port here is the memory card port where your proprietary storage sits. Can you see that? Can you see that? No? That's because there's fucking nothing in there, bitch! For those that obviously know, slotting a memory card in here is where you can get all your data, but if I don't have one of those, then how the hell do I have all of these apps and games? Well, that is because of this thing in here. The SD to Vita adapter. What this allows me to do is emulate system storage through the magic of custom firmware intervention. I have tons of games on this now, and I spent the same amount of money on this 256 gig card that I would have had to spend on a single 32 gig stick. The only major downside to this is that it obviously occupies the game card slot, and so you won't be able to use your physical games effectively, but when you can just install them directly to this, it isn't really much of a loss. This is where the 3G model debate comes in amongst the community. Hardcore modders prefer the 3G model, as with it, you can open up the back of the Vita, remove the 3G module as it is basically useless nowadays, and replace it with an SD to Vita adapter instead. This allows the same experience as what I have here, but also allows the usage of the game card slot should you have your physical games with you. This is perfectly serviceable for what I want to use it for, however, and so that's honestly not really a huge deal. Your next question in regards to this console may be, well, if you're recommending something that can play PSP and PS1 games, why on earth would I want the PSP when I could just get this and have a fuller experience? And yes, that is a perfectly valid question. I can see why that would be a little confusing to you, so let's clear that up before moving on to the Steam Deck. This console, being newer and more feature heavy, is already going to be a bit more expensive than the PSP. The PS Store on this is also still up and available, so it is somewhat still indirectly supported by Sony, and that definitely means that the price might get hiked a little at resellers. This console, in most cases, is at least 200% the price of a PSP, and so if you don't have that amount of money, a PSP is still going to be an amazing option for you, even without modding it. Games are dirt cheap for the PSP, and if you know where to look, you can still have a fantastic experience with a PSP at an extremely low price. The Vita without mods is personally mid at best. It really comes down to its own when being modded, which obviously requires an SD card, and the SD to Vita adapter, which you have to add on to the overall price. I have the PSP emulator on my Vita, and yet I still prefer to play games on my PSP. There's just something about it that keeps me using it over the Vita for non-Vita games. Also, if you are like me, I like to protect things that are prone to breaking, like analog sticks, and the sticks for the Vita just jut out the console a fair bit, so I always feel anxious whenever I have it in my pocket, and so I always just stick with the PSP, because I don't really fancy drift that will make even Ken Block blush, you know? As I say though, your preference is your preference, and so go with whatever suits you and is in your budget. All I'm saying is that there is definitely a reason as to why I have both of these consoles, and that I still use both of them together instead of just using the Vita. So, we are halfway through this list, and with that, let's take a quick look at the consoles we have already discussed and why they are still great choices for a gaming handheld in the big year of 2025 and onwards. The PSP that we started off with is still a fantastic choice due to the fact that the game library is still amazing to this day. Some of the games that came out for this device are true console quality, which is exactly what people wanted out of a device like this. The modding and homebrew scene for this is also just amazing, allowing you to install certain new apps, make tweaks to hardware, and install any game, whether it be from the PSP or not. The battery on these always lasts ages as well. I have no clue what they did to this device, but that 1800 mAh battery lasts the whole day, despite the fact it's over 20 years old, and I still can use it, you know, pretty much throughout the day. Genuine crazy work over at Sony. The next device we went over was the 3DS line of consoles and why they are also still strong contenders for being a nice handheld in the big year of 2025. The hardware is so incredibly unique with its clamshell design, and the games that come out for this really reflect how useful it can be. The synergy between those games and the hardware is honestly breathtaking sometimes. You know, you can play tons of amazing and niche titles that can't be played anywhere else, whilst also having a whole host of homebrew apps to do what you want with. The battery life on this is also incredibly good despite this device having 2 screens, you know. It really allows you to get most of the day out of this thing, and you can also hope that someone else is weird like you carries it around and gives you a Street Pass notification. The PS Vita is the latest device, and I know we've just talked about this, but humour me here. This one is a fair bit of an outlier, being a very ordinary and somewhat bad device without any custom firmware. But as soon as custom firmware is added, it becomes one of, if not the best option out of all 3. The possibilities that this device has once it's been hacked are so numerous that it's honestly amazing that a device can have so much of a comeback amongst the community. On its own, the library is definitely one of the best parts of this device, but also is still one of its biggest drawbacks. A lot of the games never saw physical releases, or if they did, they are still rather expensive to buy, and so you are going to need that proprietary storage if you want to play them. The others, even though you can mod them, and I recommend you definitely do so, will still be perfectly serviceable without any mods to speak of. However, I would only really recommend getting a PS Vita if you plan on modding it. Otherwise, you really aren't unlocking its true potential. This has been a pretty lengthy segment, and being the halfway point, seems like the perfect time for a break. You know, go grab a snack, a drink, do some cocaine in the toilet, whatever suits you. Don't worry, I'll wait. I'm gonna have some sparkling water. Oh, yeah. Beautiful. All done? Good. Let us continue. Number 4 on the list is the Steam Deck, the device we have talked about at length on this YouTube channel in particular. Thank you for your overwhelming support on those other videos, by the way. It's genuinely crazy how many people watched and interacted with them. Anyway, because I've talked about it for ages at this point, I won't go too much detail into the nitty-gritty, you know, things here, and instead think that you should watch the other videos if you wish to know more detail. After this one, of course, you wouldn't want to click off now, would you? That would suck. I will only really cover the main basics of the device, what it can do, and if it's a worthwhile shout for someone like yourself. These ones are going to be a lot up to preference on your end, due to the fact that these are still being supported with new updates or games that keep them relevant, you know, even though the Steam Deck might be a few years old compared to its competitors at this point. Whilst the Steam Deck wasn't the first of its kind, nor is it the latest, I would say that when it first came out, it was easily the most notable one. Before that, the only companies making handheld PCs were really only Chinese companies that made them, and exclusively them. Some of these include 1X Player, Aya Neo, and GPD, to name a few. The products that these companies make are genuinely really impressive on the hardware side, but tend to lack a lot on the software side, as the optimization on their end is usually a bit iffy, or the fact that they don't really tend to get much official support for certain services. After the Steam Deck shot into the limelight, however, tons of companies decided to jump on the bandwagon. Companies that we in fact know. Companies like Asus, Lenovo, and MSI wanted a piece of the action, and so released their own competition devices to mix results. It was clear that this is what was going to sell, something that had the convenience of a Switch, but also had the power and freedom of a PC. It was a concept that was made in heaven, and our Lord and Saviour Gaben made it happen in spectacular fashion. This device was advertised as a PC, so you would get the usually far superior ports of PC games with the customizability that they come packaged with, or with the convenience and ease of a regular console like a Switch or a PS5. It sounds great on paper, but is it good in practice? Short answer, yes. Long answer, fuck yes. The Steam Deck was released alongside the newest and so far best version of SteamOS yet. This meant that it was so incredibly intuitive to pick up and use, even if your brain is mainly comprised of volcanic ash. Honestly, even a monkey could figure its way out around this thing. It wasn't perfect, sure, but Valve has proven once again that they are consumer first by consistently fixing small issues or adding certain small features to make your quality of life just that much better. Those of you who have already watched the previous videos know how much I love this thing and that I will forever shill it for as long as I may live. To put it into perspective, I have both the Ally X and the Steam Deck, and even though the Ally is at an inherent disadvantage because the trigger is still fucked on it from my last video, Even if I am laying in bed and using an external controller, the deck is still my go-to option. I just love how easy it is to use. Now, a lot of people will see this and think, Linux, maybe not. And I would fully not blame you for thinking so. Linux is renowned for being incredibly complicated, but SteamOS's gaming mode is honestly just as easy as something like a PlayStation or an Xbox. It's just a series of easy-to-access menus with a few more options scattered about in there. From here, you can also access desktop mode, which basically just turns it into a full PC. You have access to all sorts of PC apps like web browsers, media players, and obviously game launchers. If you know how to use the internet and Google things, using this thing is easy. Now, a bit like the PSP and the 3DS, hacking or modding this thing is far from necessary in order to have a brilliant time with it. But putting an hour or two into modding it will give you countless hours to mess around with certain new apps and features. In my first Steam Deck video, I spoke at length about Decky Loader and how installing it is almost pivotal for really making your Steam Deck feel personalised to you. I still stand by this and regularly use Decky Loader to change certain sound effects or themes to my liking. There are so many combinations of sounds and themes that you can use that I honestly think you'll have a hard time finding someone out there who has the exact same configuration as you do. You can also find cool little apps that allow you to get a bit more information out of games, like how long they take to finish on average, so you can plan your playtime, or how well a game works with Proton. For the uninitiated, Proton is a sort of translation layer for Linux that allows Windows ports of games to work natively on Linux. Obviously, because they aren't native ports, there may be some issues here and there, but that is precisely why some add-ons for Decky exist. Since I made that video, I now almost always use a new add-on that was recently released. I was waiting for a port of lossless scaling for the deck for the longest time, and whilst it isn't as easy as clicking install and running, you can now get a decent frame gen in any game. That's right, any game. This will allow you to get a lot more out of your Steam Deck. Some older games that don't support any upscaling but don't run at 60 FPS on anything but the lowest settings can now be played at 60 on medium or even high settings. I know that some people are going to say, you know, like,
Frame gen is only really useful if your basic stuff is over 60.
But honestly, it works pretty well here, and the smaller screen means that you notice artifacting a lot less. This is just the surface of how amazing this device is. As I say, I could go on for days about why I love this thing, but I imagine you want to live your lives at some point, so I'll spare you the lecture. As I said before, however, if you wish to know a bit more, consider watching my other videos on the subject. They cover a lot of my points in a lot more detail. Like with the other devices mentioned here, however, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There are always issues no matter how great something is, and the Steam Deck is no exception in this regard. One of the major ones that puts people off is the operating system itself. SteamOS, as we mentioned previously, is actually a version of Linux, and whilst the freedom that it can bring if you have the know-how is very rewarding, for someone just looking to pick up and play, it can be a little annoying and daunting. As I say, some games just straight up don't work because they aren't compatible with Proton. There are usually workarounds, but they can require a bit of tinkering with things you don't really know about, which isn't that great. Also, being Linux, the support for anti-cheat software is very loose, and so a lot of multiplayer titles that require an anti-cheat, like Fortnite or COD, are completely cut off to you. This is a pretty big detriment if someone bought one of these expecting to be able to play those games, but it is unfortunately just the nature of Linux and is far from Steam's fault. They did what they could in terms of game compatibility. The Steam Deck itself was one of the first major first-party devices of its kind, and so because of that, you will notice that the hardware is lacking a bit when compared to others in the industry. The power of this little guy is definitely not the greatest, and you will more often than not have to lower the settings to get the most out of it. A lot of games, especially more modern titles now utilising Unreal Engine 5, won't even run at 30 FPS. Yes, we now have frame generation in any game, but if you are having to use frame gen to get 30 FPS, you're gonna have a bad time. Obviously, you can counter this by enabling FSR within the game's settings, or lowering the game's settings to a much lower quality. But oftentimes, especially recently with some games, that just isn't enough, and the Steam Deck can't keep up where some other devices may be able to fare a bit better. The battery life is also questionable on the deck, especially for people like myself, whose battery health is starting to now dip into the low 70s on the percentage. It is fine if, like myself, you mainly play in your house, if you have easy access to wall power, or if you take a battery pack out with you, but if you don't, then you're only going to really get about 2 or so hours with high intensity games, with that increasing to about 3.5 to 4 hours with low intensity games. Things are obviously going to be a lot different if you play Cyberpunk on high compared to Vampire Survivors or Terraria on the lowest settings imaginable. The other main difference is the screen. The resolution for both the Steam Deck LCD and the OLED is 800p, with each screen being either 7 inches and 7.4 inches respectively. Now, as I said for the previous devices, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as the higher pixel density on a small screen will allow you to have a better experience at lower resolutions, and having that smaller screen will allow you to cover up for more graphical oddities and artifacts overall. This can really work in advantage of the Steam Deck, and can be a real high point, especially considering the performance deficit you'd have at higher resolutions. Whilst perfectly serviceable, this is what I would consider a low point when taking the competition into account. The Ally and the Ally X, for instance, have a far higher resolution and refresh rate, being 1080p and 120Hz compared to the 800p 60Hz that the Steam Deck LCD has. But honestly, 800p 60Hz is honestly pretty reasonable for what the deck can consistently output. The bottleneck here actually works in favour of the deck at points as well. I like to play a lot of older games that the deck can easily run. When I run something like Left 4 Dead 2, because it is a very well optimised game that came out in the late 2000s, it runs amazingly on this, getting over 60 FPS. We can then use this to our advantage by lowering the TDP limit of the deck, basically forcing the APU to use less watts, therefore saving a lot of battery life without actually compromising anything to do with our gaming experience. My best rule of thumb for this is to find the preferred frame rate you want to play at, whether it be 30 or 60 or whatever in between. So for instance, if your game runs at 45, you may want to limit it to 30 or 40 to have a more stable experience, and then lower the TDP limit until you notice the frames begin to dip below your desired frame rate. From here, find where it sits comfortably at your desired frame rate and up it by 1 or 2 stages to compensate for the game getting a bit more hectic, and then you're done. You have just optimised your Steam Deck to your experience. It really is as easy as that. Obviously, some games that are a lot more intensive, the max 15 watts might be the only way you get 30 FPS, and so there isn't a lot of room for tweaks, but if you notice a bit of performance headroom, then you may as well get some extra battery life out of it with zero change to your gaming experience. I also want to quickly talk about the ergonomics again before we move on to the OLED and why I completely misunderstood it. Just look at this thing. You know, apart from being a sexy bastard, you can tell this device was actually engineered with the human hand in mind. I don't know if my hands are just the absolute perfect size for it, but this thing sits so comfortably in my hands. Now, for those of you that watched the previous video, you know exactly what's coming, but of course, I have to do this again for the uninitiated. So, this can work regardless of whether you have a Steam Deck to hand or not, but what we want to do is take your hand. You know, either hand, doesn't matter. I'm going to use my left. So what you want to do is just take your hand, hold it out with the, your palm facing away from you, and then just relax it. Relax it and sort of angle it like this. Don't flex a single muscle. You know, it should just look something like this. Hey, whoa. I see you there. Why aren't you partaking? You know, come on. It's really easy, man. I'm literally asking you to relax. You doing it now? You doing it now? Good. Let's continue. If it doesn't look anything like this, you might want to see a doctor. From here, if you have a Steam Deck, you can just slot whichever side of the device into the corresponding hand you are relaxing, and you will see just how amazing the fit is. Like, just look at that. It slots right in. It's beautiful. And then my thumbs sit perfectly on the analog sticks, meaning that I can comfortably sit like this for hours on end. I can hold this way longer than my PS Vita, which weighs less than a third of this. The comfort on this thing is just so unmatched and really allows a device like this to be a great one. I know it might seem like something so disconnected from the whole experience, but try playing for 4 hours on this and then a regular Ally, and I bet you'll be raving how good this is after that. Unfortunately, the elephant in the room when regarding ergonomics of a handheld device of this caliber is the size. This isn't exactly a small thing. Unlike the 3 tiers of device that we covered before the Steam Deck that could easily fit in your pocket, this thing is noticeably bigger. And whilst it is still considered a handheld, this new area in the market definitely starts to pull the words handheld and portable away from each other. You can definitely still take it out, it's just going to be a lot more conspicuous when compared to something like a PSP with its far smaller profile. You know what they say though, where there's a will, there's a way, so go for it, champ. Now we've talked about almost every aspect of the LCD model, but I want to talk about the OLED model for a bit and why I actually got it very wrong. I used to think that it was a waste to upgrade to the OLED from the LCD, but now I actually really want an OLED. I saw a few people in the comments of my previous videos explain to me why the 90Hz that the OLED offers is actually really beneficial for the overall gameplay experience. I did a bit of research and learned more about how the screen refresh rate can affect gameplay, and it makes a lot of sense on why they decided to increase the standard refresh rate from 60 to 90. My point before was that the Steam Deck LCD can barely achieve 60 in a lot of games in which the OLED screen would really come into its own, and so just slapping an extra 30Hz on there was actually just a bit pointless. But I was completely wrong about that, and I will explain why that is. You see, it requires a bit of very simple maths to understand why it is actually a beneficial change. The change to 90Hz means that games that run at 30 FPS or even 45 FPS run incredibly better and smoother and have a lot less input latency than you would find on a 60Hz display like the one that is featured on the LCD. This is going to get a bit technical, so strap in. On a 60Hz display, the screen obviously refreshes 60 times a second, and the math lines up for this to be 1 refresh per 16.67 milliseconds. 30 FPS then equates to 1 frame per 33.33 milliseconds. If you divide 33.33 by 16.67, then you get 1.9994 roughly, which obviously isn't an integer. This means that even though it is a matter of milliseconds, you will feel a small jitter as the screen struggles to refresh the frame on time. This can make your games feel a lot more sluggish overall, and make the 30 FPS modes borderline unplayable. On the OLED however, with that 90Hz screen, it is a lot more straightforward. If we apply the same logic and say that a 90Hz screen refreshes 90 times a second, we get 1 refresh per 11.11 milliseconds. If we then take the same maths for the 30 FPS, which equates to 33.33, and then divide 33.33 by 11.11, we get exactly 3. This means that because it is perfectly divisible, there are exactly 3 refresh intervals, no leftovers. The same is for 45 FPS as well, as that is 1 frame every 22.22 seconds. 22.22 divided by 11.11 is exactly 2. This allows games running at both 30 and 45 FPS to feel a lot smoother, as there is no leftover for the refresh intervals. No leftover milliseconds or anything, perfectly in sync, making for a far more playable experience. With this new knowledge, once I have the money, I will be 100% upgrading to an OLED Steam Deck, as both 30 FPS and 45 FPS are easy for the deck to do in most games, and will be infinitely more playable due to the less input lag and micro stutters. Also the fact that 60 FPS base frame rates are achievable in some games, but not much over that. If I activate the lossless scaling frame gen, I can get 90 FPS whilst not really compromising the input latency of my gaming experience. It really is a no-brainer. Right, that's it for the maths lesson, My maths teacher would be proud, This one's for you, Mr. Naylor. Thank you to those people that pointed this out to me in the comments of my previous videos, though. I'm always willing to be called out for saying the wrong things, and I'm even more willing to learn about the right things. So, thanks to you, my life of Steam Deck OLED ignorance is over. We have talked an awful lot about the Steam Deck once again, as I always seem to do, so let's end it with the question you all want answered. Is it still worth getting one of these? The answer's honestly no. Get the fuck out of here! Of course it's a yes, it's a resounding yes! All this being said about the OLED, the LCD that I have here is still a very good choice, as it is a lot cheaper, and does basically the same thing, albeit a little worse, but for most games you really aren't going to notice a huge difference at all. I would say that if you're looking for a Steam Deck but don't have infinite money, get an LCD. Even if I eventually want to upgrade to an OLED, I will still keep this bad boy as a spare, as I still love this thing, and it still has a lot left to give. If you do have the money, however, get an OLED. It is going to be a better experience overall, and you will enjoy it more thanks to the better frame times, the better looking colours, with the slightly better battery life. Oh shit, I never even mentioned the repairability of these things, I'll make this quick, I promise. Valve actually has a bit of a deal going on with iFixit to allow you to buy replacement parts for your Steam Deck instead of just replacing the entire unit as a whole. Because of this alliance, Valve did their due diligence and made sure that this device is as repairable as possible. I'm not going to take any device apart here today because, as my track record stands, it's not exactly great, but once again, my other videos on the subject will go over the internals. Almost all aspects of the internals can be removed with ease and replaced with just as much effort. All you've got to do is remove like 3 screws and a couple of easy to access ribbon cables, and Bob's your uncle. It really is a nice money saving method. Now, for the ROG Ally X. Jesus Christ, it is hot in here, I'm really sweaty. Another handheld PC that we have here today. You can easily substitute this for any number of different handheld PCs from tons of different companies. This is just the one I have, therefore the one I will discuss. A lot of the points will be the same amongst devices, however. The ROG Ally X was, up until recently, to my knowledge, the most powerful first-party handheld PC on the market. This thing has some absolute beast specs, including 24GB of RAM over the Steam Deck 16, that beautiful 1080p 120Hz display, and an incredibly powerful Ryzen Z1 Extreme APU. Now, I know the Xbox Ally and the Xbox Ally X have just been released with their beast of an APU, the Z2 Go and the Z2 Extremes, but this thing is honestly still overkill when it comes to handheld gaming. You could run pretty much anything on this with a few tweaks here and there, but is it as good as practice as it sounds on paper? The answer to that question is sort of. It depends. It really has it nailed on the hardware side of things, but on the software and operating system, not so much in my opinion. You see, most PC handhelds, because they aren't made by Valve, a company that could just make their own operating system, come pre-installed with Windows. It might be a somewhat modified variant, but fundamentally it is still Windows under the hood. This means that for something in the form factor of a controller with a screen, it really isn't the best that you could be dealing with, and we will get into how to make this a true Steam Deck competitor later, but until then, I'm going to shit on Windows because, Jesus Christ, it sucks now. Windows is obviously built for PCs, and at the very least, laptops with a touchscreen, not a device that has joysticks and a tiny 7-inch screen. Whilst the displays on all handheld PCs are touchscreens to my knowledge, navigating small buttons and pop-ups with either your fat fingers or a joystick is a real pain in the arse. It always assumes you have a keyboard or mouse installed, and so caters the experience to that. This can make changing basic settings or even setting things up like your Wi-Fi a real chore, as it is just unnecessarily clunky. Windows in this form factor is just woefully underwhelming, and whilst it does have its benefits, SteamOS is just a much smoother option with its controller-first interface. It removes a lot of the headache that Windows can give on a device like this. Before I owned the Steam Deck, I actually owned an Aya Neo in 2021. I can't exactly remember which model it was, but it was the latest one at the time. I just really wanted to see what I was in for when I got a Steam Deck, and my god, that thing sucked. I think it had a 4th gen Ryzen chip in it, which was less powerful than the custom APU the Steam Deck had, but it also came pre-installed with Windows and a woefully unoptimized piece of software to control the device itself. It was genuinely one of the worst experiences I have ever had with a device like this. At the time, I loved the device because it was new and novel, but it was one of those few pieces of tech I was glad to see the back of. Moving to SteamOS changed my life, I swear to god. It was that good, and so when I got my Ally, I wanted a similar experience, and so I wondered if I could just jerry-rig a SteamOS install onto it, but unfortunately, I don't think that would work very well. Another option did actually come to my attention though when I got my Ally, and that was an operating system based on SteamOS called Bazzite. Bazzite is genuinely an amazing alternative. There are multiple versions depending on which handheld you own, all with their own settings that fit specific to the device you own. For me, obviously, I installed the Ally version, and within an hour or so, I had a SteamOS-like experience with the power of an Ally. It seemed like the perfect combination, and it was for a while. I will always remember getting this and taking it to my aunt's the next day to take it for a test run. I installed Bazzite, ran Mad Max, turned the resolution down to 720p, cranked the settings to their lowest, and locked the refresh rate to 60. In the Bazzite quick menu, I changed the TDP to 15 watts, which is about half of what the Ally X can output, set FSR on to take advantage of that 1080p screen, and I just set off. I had basically the same experience as my Steam Deck, but with a higher native resolution, and so the FSR made it look a bit better, and the battery lasted, with constant play mind you, for over 3 hours. I went into her house with about 99% and left with 33% battery. I could have easily gotten another hour or so. That was on a fairly intensive game at 60 FPS as well. I know some may argue that what is the point of limiting yourself when you have all of this cool shit that this device offers, and fair enough, but at the end of the day, this is a handheld. I want to test how long it can run for. I honestly think that I would still be using this as a primary handheld had the trigger not broken when taking it apart for the previous video. I've tried various fixes, but nothing sticks. Gonna have to send it off if I want the true handheld experience back, but I don't really have a spare heart to sell right now, so whatever. I still use this daily though as a media player, so don't worry, it's not just wasting away. So if you are coming from the Steam Deck like me and don't mind a vaguely similar experience in exchange for a shit ton more battery life, or if you want a decent handheld that will stand the test of time, then this is far from a bad shout. The only major downside to all of this is that the price will reflect this. You know, I am currently indebted to Currys for the next 2 years of my life with this device. If I miss a single payment, they're going to send around a hit squad. At some point, I do want to continue using this properly, as it is a very good device, and I'd ideally like to get a portable monitor and a keyboard to go with it, you know, sort of make it a pseudo-gaming laptop type setup. The actual build of the device itself isn't too bad, you know, the plastic outer casing feels very sturdy, you know, this thing could definitely take a few knocks. I certainly wouldn't want to be hitting the head with it, that's for sure. The repairability of this also isn't the greatest. You can buy some individual parts here and there, but when I bought a new trigger, had to buy it direct from Asus themselves, and that was about 30 quid for a bit of plastic, so it's not great, but there is a sense of repairability there. The ergonomics of this thing aren't great as well. You know, I tend to find that my fingers when I'm holding this are being strained as they just want to bend outwards while holding this. Like, it's quite hard to show. Like, that sort of shows it a bit. Like, my fingers just bend outwards a bit and it gets really uncomfortable after a while. This is miles more comfortable than the regular Ally, however, and is also probably fine if you didn't use the Steam Deck for 2 years before you got this, but I'm just so used to the Steam Deck that I cannot get used to this long term. Like the Steam Deck though, even though this device is classified as a handheld, it loses a lot of its portability factor due to just how big and heavy it is. You can absolutely still take this out and about, and I have done so multiple times, but if this is something you just want to play while on the bus travelling to and from work, something like the 3DS or the Vita is honestly a better option. It all depends on your preferences. So, is the ROG Ally X, or insert competition device here that isn't the Steam Deck, worth it in 2025? Short answer, yes. Long answer, it depends. This is obviously a fantastic tier of device that holds a lot of worth within the handheld PC market, but in my opinion, the ratio of positives to negatives in this device is a lot more even than it is with the Steam Deck. I just personally find the Steam Deck to be a lot more of a complete package for the most part. It mostly depends on your preferences again though. Did you want something with better hardware or better software? Yes, you can change certain aspects of the device to fit your specific tastes, but at the end of the day, any major changes away from the intended experience the device ships with, even if it works better for you, there are going to be issues to be encountered along the way. If you are willing to put your time into whatever device you choose, however, then the chances are that you will be more willing to live with whatever you choose in the long run. It is definitely worth doing your research and coming to your own conclusions about certain topics like this, because I can guarantee that there will be loads of other videos out there with that are similar to this one, in which they left the Steam Deck behind a long time ago because they think another device like this is far better, and that is great. I love that people can come together and discuss their preferences for things like this. It just so happens that after seeing both sides, I actually prefer the security of the Steam Deck and its features. I have a PC and a PS5 to play games properly. I don't need them to look and play as great as I do on them. So yes, I would say that getting a PC handheld is 100% worth it, but look at plenty of sources to determine which one you would want, as even the cheaper ones like the Steam Deck LCD can be hefty investments. Now, the final main item on this list. As I say, we've still got the mobile phone after this, but that is a bonus entry. The Nintendo Switch 2, and by extension, the Nintendo Switch 1, if that is all you want, have, or can afford. Before we get onto the Switch 2, we sort of need to talk about why the Switch 1 is such a great console and how it changed the industry. The Nintendo Switch came along in early 2017. I believe that this was the perfect time for it to do so, as portable gaming with proper consoles had essentially all but died. There were a few people still running with a PS Vita or a 3DS, but other than that, all portable gaming was at the time was the miracle to the world that was PUBG Mobile, played almost exclusively by little Timmy with his mum's Samsung Galaxy S4, or people from Brazil. The Nintendo Switch really reignited the fire within the industry that handheld gaming needed. I always remember being out and about and seeing people on their Switch with their friends or whatever, and it just made me really jealous that I never had one. That console was so accessible towards the people it catered for, and it just made it a true force to be reckoned with. Even though power-wise it wasn't up to scratch with the PS4 and the Xbox One, or obviously the PS5 and Xbox Series X, it was still a very popular option amongst people who only wanted to dip their toes into the hobby. The amount of people that have a Switch, even now, is kinda crazy. Now, unlike the 3DS mentioned earlier that was first and foremost a handheld console, the Switch, whilst trying to still fill that market, was entering a sort of new market of people who wanted both in one device. They needed to make a device that had the appeal of both a handheld portable machine, like a 3DS, and a home console that could play the latest and greatest in the best quality, like a PlayStation or an Xbox. Unfortunately, a lot of games released for the hardware that weren't first-party titles absolutely sucked. The gameplay was there, as it was on other systems, but it just didn't look the part at all. All of this combined with the fact that they almost always ran at 30 FPS made things so much worse. The first party support for the system was pretty incredible though, with tons of critically acclaimed titles that fans still rave about 8 years later. This meant that while the home console crowd were appeased to some extent, there was still something left desired in the third party support that another console or a PC could fill a ton better. This was one of the main reasons as to why the Switch wasn't as successful as it could have been. Don't get me wrong, I do not wish to undersell the achievements of the Switch 1, but they could have easily surpassed the records of competitors if they just put a bit more thought into how third-party titles would integrate with the hardware. They just felt very half-baked in my opinion, similar to the ports of third-party titles on their previous handheld consoles. It just seemed more like a proof of concept or a shoddy port, instead of something that was actually a complete experience. This is something that I believe the Switch 2 has and will eventually properly fill. The Switch 2 was revealed earlier this year, or early 2025 if you are watching this in the distant future. Hello aliens, how you doing? The reveal felt a little underwhelming, personally. Maybe it was because we sort of knew the gimmick that this console would have, and it wouldn't really hit us nearly as hard as the Switch 1 did. But it just did not hit as much as I thought it would. I remember sitting down to really concentrate on the reveal, but afterwards I was just left thinking, well, yeah, is that it? That can't be it. But at the end of the day, what else was I expecting? It's a Switch 2 after all. It's just a Switch 1, but better. And that is exactly what it is. The Switch 2, in my opinion, is the best worst console at this current point. And I'm personally really enjoying mine, but outside of my little bubble, I can tell a lot of people are having buyer's remorse towards it, and I cannot blame them. I think that a lot of this will go away with time. You know, there needs to be more games being made and released for the hardware that really take advantage of like the new things like the mouse control and whatnot. You know, that is what makes a console great after all. If games released for it really integrate with the hardware that makes it unique. So far, however, the main games we got was a Mario Kart game, which is cool, but personally felt a little bit underwhelming when compared to Mario Kart 8. Loads of remasters and Pokemon Legends ZA, which I refuse to elaborate on, as every Pokemon YouTuber under the sun has covered why it's so shit. It just really doesn't seem like a great launch for a console that has been out for 6 months now. I'm hoping that support will pick up in the next year or so, and that they stop relying so heavily on the Switch 1 still, you know. Seeing Cyberpunk fully on a portable console is cool though. I'm enjoying playing it through again here. I think the reason I'm enjoying mine at the moment is mainly due to the fact that I'm playing through some games that I've never played before. I'm going through Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu, Pokemon Scarlet, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, and the No More Heroes series. Whilst I am replaying Cyberpunk, which is only available on the Switch 2, I've played it several times before on other hardware, so I'm not counting it. These games that I have mentioned, however, are all available on the Switch 1. Granted, the Switch 1 port of Pokemon Scarlet looks and runs considerably worse, but overall, £450 for 2 games and an update for a Switch 1 game seems very steep. I cannot help but feel that even though I am loving my Switch 2, would I be loving the Switch 1 if I was doing the exact same thing there? Is it the console or the content on it? As long as I'm enjoying it though, then I guess it's worth it. Another major complaint that people had with the Switch 2 was that it went back to an LCD display instead of sticking to the OLED display that the Switch OLED has, claiming that the Switch OLED would obviously look better than the Switch 2. I can see both sides of this argument, however. The Switch 2 is obviously the latest and greatest in Nintendo's technology at the moment, and so if their previous console can have an OLED screen, then why can't the newer one? It kinda sucks that they went a bit backwards in this way, very akin to Sony and the PS Vita models. On the flip side, however, this console is already extremely expensive, sitting at about £400 to £450 on its own, and so including an OLED screen would actually only inflate the already high price tag a lot more. Also, the LCD that they do use in this is actually pretty great. You know, whilst it doesn't really have the beautiful deep blacks that an OLED might have, the colours on this screen are genuinely so beautiful and are really vibrant at points. Pokemon Scarlet, a very colourful game, you know, shines through on the Switch 2, really taking advantage of that HDR capable screen. Honestly, such a beautiful experience that pulls you in. Even Cyberpunk, a game that I have played on vastly superior hardware, still looks incredible in a lot of places. The vibrant neon lights that Night City exhibits look simply divine on this screen, and it makes me wonder how good the OLED in the Switch 2 OLED will be. One other major gripe I and many others had was that the Switch 2 games were priced so horrendously high. Mario Kart World, a game that, let's be honest, shouldn't be priced as such, is priced at £75. I don't have buyer's remorse for the Switch 2, as I know that will become incredible later down the line, but I do have a lot of buyer's remorse for Mario Kart World. At the end of the day, it is classic Mario Kart action, simple races, but now with this fairly large and albeit empty open world, and that still means it's worth over 70 quid somehow. Luckily, Nintendo is getting a lot of shit for it, but it really just sets a precedent over games that don't really meet the requirements of being priced that high. It just seems fucking stupid. You know, the cheaper you make your games, the more people will invest. It's that easy. You are alienating tons of people by making your games this expensive. I don't know why I'm saying this as if Johnny Nintendo will be watching this, but you know, is what it is. A lot of people's problems really lie with the fact that the Switch 2 doesn't really feel like a Switch 2, but more of a Switch 1.5 instead. It's more like the new Nintendo Switch, just like the 3DS line did back in the day. Slight upgrades to the external and internal hardware, but overall the same package. Not to mention that the device itself looks a whole lot less interesting in my opinion. I really loved the unique design of the Switch 1, with its incredibly charming opposing neon red and blue Joy-Cons. Whilst the red and blue has been kept to an extent here, it is a lot less noticeable and is a lot more, like, washed out, and that makes the device look a lot less premium in my opinion. I'm hoping for some more flashy Joy-Cons soon. Me and many others also noticed the fact that the UI between consoles looks incredibly similar, if not identical in some areas. It is just a generic grey background with squares that tell you which was the last game you played. It's serviceable and fully functional, sure, but it isn't that interesting when you just keep the same theme over and over. The game library is still a huge selling point for this, however. I know I just went on an entire tirade about how the Switch 2 game catalogue is the tiniest thing on planet Earth, but just like with the 3DS before it, the Switch 2 is almost completely fully backwards compatible with Switch 1 software. So any games you purchased, whether it be digitally or physically, will both work perfectly when slotted into the Switch 2. This means that if you are waiting on a game to arrive, or you are weird and purchase the console without being able to buy a single game for it, then you're pretty much set. As I said also, some Switch games have received free updates that increase the internal resolution from 720p to the Switch 2's native 1080p, and this may or may not also be included with a patch that makes the game run at 60 FPS. Speaking of frames as well, the Switch 2 does exactly the same thing as the Steam Deck OLED. We now have an increase of refresh rate from 60 all the way up to 120. This means that the 30 FPS that you might get on some games is going to feel a lot better, and I must admit, in games that I have played, it really does. It also means that some games like Cyberpunk that have a performance mode can easily be played in 40 FPS, which looks and plays a lot better than 30 FPS. This works flawlessly on handheld mode, but obviously make sure that the TV/monitor that you hook it up to also supports 120 FPS if you play in docked mode, as well, you know, it isn't supported by 60, as 40 just isn't a factor of 60. The VRR on this display also really helps all of this as well. The Switch 1, should you have one, depending on when it was made, can also be modded with custom firmware. I had one like this for a while until I accidentally fucked it up, and now even though I have reset it several times back to official firmware, it won't let me connect to the internet and update it, so I'm fairly certain it is bugged. If you want to mod your Switch and you think it might qualify, check the serial number on the bottom with a checker online. It should automatically tell you whether your model of Switch has been patched or not. If not, then it is a fairly lengthy process from what I can remember, but it does allow you to play any Switch game once again, so it is definitely worth it should you not care about the online aspect. Now, you are wondering if the Switch 2 is worth it in the year it released, and I would be stupid to say anything but yes, so I will say yes, but with a catch. If you have a Switch 1 and are saving for the Switch 2, then I would say wait until there is a game you are desperate to play. As for the moment, it really isn't worth it. If you don't have a Switch in any capacity, then I would gauge your financial situation. Can you get a Switch 2, or would you rather just get a cheap Switch 1 with a bunch of games for the same price? Chances are you'll be playing those Switch 1 games on Switch 2 anyway, as there aren't tons of games available for the Switch 2 exclusively yet, so it might just be more beneficial for you to get the older console with many more games. This honestly really depends on what suits you currently. I got one because I wanted to be an early adopter to what I hope will become great. I really like the idea of the mouse controls, and I wanted something that could do that whilst being a handheld. Considering the amount of games coming out for Switch 1 still, you know, Pokemon Legends ZA got a Switch 1 port after all, the Switch 1 is still alive and kicking and will probably be doing so for a little while, so maybe that's a better shout for you. Now, we have done all of the main devices. We have covered 3 small and old, as well as 3 big and new. The old dogs surprisingly hold up rather well considering what can be done with them, and the new blood is also holding out incredibly well still, even if the Steam Deck is starting to already show its age a bit. The last one, as I say, is a bit of a bonus entry, but could still be a very viable option for a lot of people considering that almost everyone on planet Earth has at least one. This being the smartphone. I wanted to include this because whilst mobile gaming isn't as rich with choice when compared to other devices that we've shown in today, there are a lot of things in which you can play on a mobile device both officially and unofficially. Also, there is a huge difference in tons of different mobile phones. This one here, the one I will be using today, is the closest one I could get, is the LG Wing from late 2020. What a fucking beautiful phone this is. I bought this for my birthday earlier this year. I love it, just look at that. This is obviously quite an old phone, either close to or at 5 years old at this point, so the performance is not going to be great in some games when compared to more modern phones of like today. Obviously for you, you might have a more powerful phone, like something with a Snapdragon 8 Elite, or in the future, if you're watching this, something with a Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2. There is a lot of different devices in this industry. This may not be the phone, obviously, you have, however. You may have something, modern but budget, like the CMF Phone 2 Pro that we discussed, or like an older flagship like the Samsung S20 Ultra that released in 2020 as well, or even like the S25 Ultra, a brand new flagship device. Take a look at like the Antutu scores or whatever for your phone, and you can sort of gauge scores from there, but for the most part, I only just have this, like I say, because it was the first one I could reach. You're going to be able to do exactly the same things on this as you will with another phone. Now, there are tons of mobile games out there that will suit your taste. I'm personally quite partial to a few shooter games as well as some racing games, both genres of which are fairly abundant on the Play Store. I sometimes like to jump into a game of Warzone Mobile. I also really like playing regular COD Mobile occasionally. F1 Mobile Racing is also a banger shout, along with my personal favourite racing game on mobile, Real Racing 3. Genuinely amazing game, especially if you're looking for a Gran Turismo type game. Best part, however, every single one of those games that I've mentioned is free to play. Obviously, like with any free-to-play game that is supported in the current year, it is of course loaded to the brim full of microtransactions that plague the in-game store. These games are fully playable without these, however, and you can have an equally fun time without spending a single penny. Games like Warzone Mobile actually have cross-progression, so you can earn camos and XP on the latest COD on your PlayStation or PC, and then if you're out and about, jump onto Warzone Mobile and all of your unlocks will be there, which is a pretty neat way of doing it in my opinion. What I'm saying is that there will be at least one game that takes your fancy. If you are a mega loser like myself, you may even have a way to play these games in a far better and easier way. Like these. These are just a few ways you can level up your mobile gaming world, and I tend to use both of these fairly regularly. This is obviously just a simple DualSense controller with a cheap plastic brace stuck to it, which is honestly my preferred method of doing this, as the controller just feels way nicer in my hand. The software support you also get for one of these is unmatched as well. This is also my official backbone controller. The support you get for one of these is also really good, but personally, the analog sticks and triggers don't feel as good as like the DualSense here, but the fact that it is so delightfully compact can be a real deal for some people. I still use this occasionally despite having this. Basically, just either use the phone itself or weigh up your positives and negatives with devices like these and choose whichever's best for you. Chances are if you're a gamer you might already have a controller, or if you have a bit of spare cash and want something compact, no better place to look. Now, I'm not sure about Apple and their products because I know how locked down iOS can be when compared to Android, but at least for the moment, Android has a lot more options open to them when regarding installing apps that aren't officially advertised on the Play Store. I often dabble in finding apps with certain benefits over the ones presented to you on the Play Store. I like to see if I can find the paid versions of apps for free, which I can do if I look in the right places, and I encourage you to do so as well. I can't say that, I've just encouraged piracy. Ignore I said that, ignore I said that. Obviously, should you decide to go this route, please do your due diligence and make sure that you are careful with what you are downloading. I know for a fact I won't be held responsible for any damage caused to your phone or your bank account, so just be careful. As many of you may have noticed on the Play Store, you can also get a number of emulators for a certain number of consoles. I personally have a lot of fantastic memories with the PlayStation 2. There were so many games on there that I'm sure many of you have enjoyed throughout the years, and so with the use of an emulator, we can actually play PS2 games on a mobile in a pretty effective way. It's really nice being able to sit in bed, controller in hand, and just jump into some Time Splitters Future Perfect, There are so many things you can do to change your experience with this as well. You can change the resolution to be more in line with what your device can output. Just be sure your phone can run at higher resolutions. Even budget devices can get a PS2 emulator running pretty easily. You just obviously don't want to get too overzealous with it and end up ruining your experience. Even though I use a controller, you can actually play just using the screen. It isn't a fantastic experience as you can't actually feel which buttons you're pressing, and they are sort of transparent, so obviously make most of the screen still visible, but if you have nothing else, they are still very functional. It doesn't just stop at PS2 either. I have both PS1 and PSP emulators on my other devices. This just opens up so many vast and incredible libraries, all from the comfort of the lowest profile of any of the devices we've talked about today. I know I've said multiple times that playing on the native hardware is unmatched, and it 100% is, but if you don't have any of these other devices and just have a phone, it goes to show that there is still so much that can be done with it. The ability to be able to play these games as well as you can on a device such as this can really make deciding to go for a better phone worth it. My phone bill came up recently and I decided to go for the S25 Ultra. Unfortunately it's damaged at the moment so I can't use it for this, but I purchased this and specifically went for the 512GB variant just so I could have the best experience with games and emulators. It worked absolutely brilliantly until it broke. Rest assured I will be using it again though once I get it repaired. Please be aware however that if you are planning on using device for emulating certain games, that your phone has the storage fit for the task. Personally, I like to have between sort of 10 to 20 PS2 games, as well as 5 to 10 PS1 and PSP games. This takes up an enormous amount of storage, and this can easily occupy over 100GB of data if you aren't careful, and just start downloading willy-nilly. For older or more budget-oriented phones with 128 to 256GB of storage, you may want to either invest in some expandable storage if your phone supports that, or limit yourself to between 5 to 10 emulator games at one time. Because the PS2 has quite large file sizes when compared to other consoles, your storage can quickly get bogged down, but if you want something like the Game Boy Advance or the NES, then you will have far better mileage when it comes to storing games, as they are a lot smaller per game. Basically, my advice here is to just know your limits and work within them instead of trying to push the boundaries when it obviously won't work. So, we have discussed official Play Store games, unofficial titles and releases that you can find strewn about the internet, and emulators, all of which most phones will handle with little to no problems, provided you adjust your graphics settings accordingly of course. What else is there though? Well, there is an entire angle we haven't even come in from yet, that being game streaming. Now, I bet you've seen those ads around that just say this is an Xbox when referring to a Samsung smart fridge or a literal pile of dog shit, but in a sense, they really aren't kidding. They made it so you can go to a browser on your device, sign into your Xbox account, and obviously if you have access to Xbox Game Pass, you can just stream games directly to your phone in a matter of seconds. Obviously for this you'll need a decent internet connection as the games are being streamed to you and are not running locally like you would get with an emulator. The same can be said for GeForce Now. If you want to play the PC versions of some games via streaming to your phone, obviously again, if you want to do this then make sure you have a GeForce Now subscription and a decent internet connection. For someone like myself who is running on Wi-Fi 7, the ability to stream games has become a shit ton easier for me, and so streaming via Game Pass has become a real solid way to play games, even if I do so through my 5G mobile data. Let's say though, you don't have a subscription to any of these streaming services, but you do have a PS4, 5 or a PC. You can actually install some apps like PS Remote Play or Steam Link to your mobile device instead. This allows you to wirelessly stream your console or PC games directly to your phone, and this can allow you to have some truly graphically impressive experiences whilst sitting in another room or whilst you're shitting your guts out after eating a dodgy kebab the night prior. Again, you might need a controller for all of these to really get the most out of the experience, but I believe most if not all of these services can at least be used without any external peripherals. This means that it is definitely an accessible way to enjoy tons of games without much hassle. The fact that you can enjoy modern libraries via streaming, older libraries via emulation, and unique mobile exclusive libraries via the use of the Play Store or App Store can make a phone as a primary gaming device a very viable option for someone who isn't very moneyed at the moment. As I say though, 99% of all people on this godforsaken planet have a smartphone in some capacity, and even if it's not great, a decent internet connection can easily allow you to play fantastic games in a great quality. Or if your phone is good, but your internet isn't, maybe installing some local emulator games might be more your shout. It is such a versatile platform that can be taken advantage of in so many weird and wonderful ways. The question of if one of these is worth it in 2025 is actually pretty irrelevant in all honesty. This is mainly due to the fact that everybody and their nan has at least one smartphone. They are so ingrained into today's society that life is basically impossible without one. So many services require access to one of these, and because of that, they are everywhere in everyone's pockets. So yes, for whatever reason you do not own a smartphone, honestly, you need to be dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Life will be so much easier for you if you just take a week or two to adapt to using one, and you will discover how much simpler life can be. I hate that it is this way, but unfortunately, in today's world, it's sink or swim, and I chose to build a whole ass life raft out of these fuckers. As for the 100% of other people that watch these videos, if you already have one, then this is just a cool way to showcase that your phone can be right up there with the greats when it comes to handheld gaming. I know mobile gaming has garnered a bit of a bad name in recent years, with the only main games being shit ports of consoles or PC titles, or gacha games, but if you look beneath the surface and do a bit of research, whole new worlds can be opened up to you. One minute you could be looking disgustingly at the install button for Genshin Impact, and then the next minute you could be jumping into the Outer Worlds 2, a brand new game, directly from your phone while sitting on the bus. All it takes is a bit of research. Now, we have covered every single device here today, and I was going to rank them from most worth to least worth, but after fully writing the script, I probably realised that most of these devices fill different areas within the industry. Sure, some of them overlap, but they are all amazing at specific things that others might lack in. So instead of ranking them in worth, I am going to go over each device again briefly and give them a rating between 1 and 10, with 10 being the most worth. Now, remember that a lot of this is down to my personal preference and the sort of things that I look for in a device like this, so once again, your mileage may vary. Do your own research and see which one fits you best. I will try to go over most of the actual on-paper facts though. Let's do what we did for the devices themselves. Start with the oldest and work our way through to the newest. The PSP. The PSP, as I said, is my favourite between it and the DS, mainly just because of how magical it felt playing console-like games on a device that fit in my hands. It also helped that I genuinely didn't get anything like an Xbox 360 or a PS3 until about 2012. I was stuck with a PS2 for that long. This meant that the games I played on the PSP felt a lot more equal to what I was used to playing for so long, and for that, I just loved the little thing. Not to mention that nowadays these things are cheap as shit. I had a look at the local marketplaces online, and the most expensive one I saw was about 70 quid, and that is definitely more on the expensive end, but it did come with about 15 games and some peripherals, so it does seem quite fair. For the console on its own, however, the cheapest I saw was about 35 to 40. Prices for these will obviously differ depending on where you are and when you look, so it's worth having a proper look around for any deals because I can guarantee you will find one. I got that black one a couple of years back with a game in its original box, mind you, for 35 quid. The deals are out there, you just gotta know where to look. There are also tons of different models for you to choose from depending on your preferences and your use case, so I know that there will be at least one that fits your preference or price range. The battery on these things is also still absolutely amazing as well, easily lasting me an entire day with a lot of playtime, despite it being over 2 decades old. It is amazing how well it has held up, really. All of this combined with the fact that the library on this thing is not only exquisite, but very large, really makes for an appealing device. The fact that you can mod this and include not only PSP and PS1 games, but NES, SNES, and all the other older consoles, but to an extent also N64, it is wild how, how versatile this little device can be despite its age. Honestly, a solid 7.5 out of 10. It is a fantastic device for what it is, plus it being cheap. But the fact that it is definitely starting to show its age, and obviously can't play more modern titles, really will let it down if that's what you're after. Next up, once again, we have the 3DS. No matter which model you got, you are going to have a pretty standardized experience. Only a handful of games support the new controls, and outside of the upgraded specs for better visual fidelity and performance, the new models are a little superfluous to requirements. The original line, like what I have here, will play 99% of the 3DS games perfectly fine. Still, speaking of the games, due to the hardware being as unique as it is, and with Nintendo being as stingy as they are, the games for this thing are honestly unlike anything a traditional console or any other handheld will provide. If that alone is what you are after, then that is definitely a solid choice. But the fact that you can also play any regular DS game on this, as well as install several emulators for older consoles like the GBA or the NES, really allow this device to be as great as it is in 2025 and onwards. Like with the PSP and the Vita, the homebrew scene will only become more prominent as time goes on, and so these devices may become more and more worth it as time progresses. The price of these things can be a fair bit depending on the model, but as I say, I got this original XL for £30, so if you look around some local places, both IRL and online, you might find a diamond in the rough. The battery for the 3DS is also still holding incredibly strong. I imagine it has been replaced in mine since it was released, but I'm unsure. You know, nothing indicates the back was removed by anyone bar me, however, so I can safely assume that the battery residing in mine is the same one it arrived with when it was first purchased back in 2012, or whenever the previous owner bought it. Still, this is honestly such a solid choice, as unlike the other devices in which emulation is a lot more feasible, the unique hardware on this means that the games made for this truly only feel good on it. A solid 8 out of 10 choice for me. There are a lot of great titles, but like the PSP, it's starting to show its age a little bit. Also like the PSP, however, this can be enjoyed with or without mods, but it's best enjoyed with. Just obviously don't expect to be playing the latest and greatest titles with it. Next on our list, we have the PS Vita. We discussed in detail why this device was actually severely underwhelming when it first released in 2012. This was in part due to the fact that the storage was not included with the device and was sold at exorbitant prices for small storage numbers. Plus also due to the fact that the first party support was essentially abandoned about a year after the release of the Vita, when the vastly more successful PS4 came along. You know, it was unfortunately a bit of a dud when it released, but as time has gone on, the homebrew scene for this has gotten so vast that it just makes it a real gem to own in 2025. That OLED screen for the 1000 model had really made for some impressive and vibrant visuals as well. I feel so lucky that I can own one of them and just see the benefits of a device like this now, even without the mods. It is just unfortunate that this device really isn't worth it anymore unless you plan on using custom firmware. With it though, like I say, you can adjust system clocks, install any Vita game, to which there are many great games and ports that make this device a quality gaming system, plus install a PSP emulator directly inside of it to play both PSP and PS1 games. This has a more vast library than the PSP by default, but the fact that it is only really enjoyable with mods, and the fact that the battery life and ergonomics on this aren't as great, plus the fact that they can still be a little more expensive secondhand, I can only leave it with an 8 out of 10. It is a fantastic console for sure, but it does have glaring drawbacks that prevent it from being higher. But overall, it is such a charming and premium feeling little device that is well worth it in my opinion. I love that thing, and I am certain that others like me with modded Vitas will also be able to say the same. Now, onto the Steam Deck. This is vastly different from any other device we have discussed thus far, and that is because it is a vastly different device. This is a handheld for sure, but sort of forgoes the portability aspect in exchange for a lot more power and freedom. This device allows us to play almost any game you want, bar a select few. Emulators are easy as hell to install on this thing, which can really add to the enjoyment. I have several emulators on it and use them all regularly despite owning the native hardware. Whilst the native hardware is unmatched, there is definitely something novel about playing the same game on a bigger screen in a higher resolution or frame rate. And the Steam Deck does that perfectly, whilst also being able to play a vast library of PC titles. It is honestly such a charming little device that throws tons of light onto the handheld PC scene, and for that, I love it. The ease of use that SteamOS enables me to have, whilst also having that much power, is honestly a dream come true. This thing is incredible. As I said earlier, this does come with its own shortcomings. Being a handheld and somewhat portable device with this much power, there is a big issue with battery life. It is definitely recommended to carry a battery pack with you if you plan on going out with it, or leaving it plugged into wall power if you intend to use it at home in bed or something. It is definitely something to keep in mind if you plan on getting one of these. Also, it is the oldest first-party PC handheld to my knowledge, and so the hardware will reflect that. Other handheld PCs, like we have discussed previously, have far better hardware, but with certain tweaks, the Steam Deck can hold its own very well, and I am actually impressed at how well it still works despite the lacking hardware. The ergonomics on this thing are also unmatched still. I can comfortably sit with that in my hands for hours on end without me ever getting tired. It is actually incredible how well the exterior design of this feels, and without compromising the aesthetic as well. It is a beautiful and comfy little device. Overall, if you are looking for something to get into the PC handheld market with, but at a cheaper, more budget-oriented price point, there is no better place to look than the Steam Deck. It will give you a fantastic experience with at least 30 FPS in 99% of games. Again, because they are PC games, you can tweak the settings to your liking, as well as add some mods for some games, from gameplay mods to optimization mods to make your experience better. It really is such a versatile and free platform that has the same ease of use as a console. Unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, because the system natively runs on Linux, a lot of software is either incompatible, flat out, or without annoying certain tweaks. This can be intimidating if you don't know what you're dealing with, which is perfectly fair enough. This does also cut off certain online capable titles that use anti-cheat like COD, Fortnite, and GTA 5 Online. It is a bit of a pain, but it is what it is, unfortunately. Regardless of these shortcomings, however, this device is incredibly good at what it does, and I will continue to love this device despite competition being rife in the industry. A solid 9 out of 10 all in all. A great choice all around if you are willing to put up with the Linux foibles and slightly worse hardware. The ROG Ally X is next on our list, being a direct competitor to the Steam Deck, being a handheld PC not made by a company that can just make their own operating system. It obviously runs on Windows, which we have discussed at length, both here and in my previous videos. Windows constantly fights for control, and so ends up making the overall experience feel a lot more sluggish overall. It always assumes you have some form of PC peripheral connected, and so isn't really optimised for the hardware presented whatsoever. It does have its benefits, however. Being Windows, it is a lot more familiar for certain people who aren't too experienced with anything else. Plus, you can play all the online games that are missing from the Steam Deck and other Linux-compatible devices. It can be a really good choice for those who want to play those, but for everything else, Windows just bogs down the whole experience, making it borderline unusable for someone like myself. That is why I prefer to install Bazzite instead. With Bazzite, I get the comfort and ease of use that the Steam Deck provides, plus the hardware and power that the Ally X can provide. It really is a good combination, and as I said earlier, that configuration would still be my primary driver for a handheld if the trigger hadn't broken. The ergonomics of this device aren't fantastic, however, leagues above the regular Ally with its sharp corners at the bottom, but leagues below the Steam Deck and its flawlessly engineered controller layout. This might be such a non-issue for other people, but for me, I hate it after about an hour of playing. Overall, this device may be perfect for someone, but in its default configuration with Windows and not Bazzite, I just cannot recommend it over something as easy to use as the Steam Deck. If you are prepared to take the leap and install Bazzite, however, this device is an easy 9 out of 10. Without it, I would have to give it a 7 out of 10. I will comfortably sit in the middle ground of an 8 out of 10 though, mainly for the potential that this device has. Once again, the penultimate item on our list is the Nintendo Switch 2. Now this is a bit of a weird one, as I say. This device is great and I am loving it, but a lot of what I'm enjoying here I could easily do on another device like my PC or the Switch 1. This means that for a lot of people, the Switch 2 at this current point just really isn't worth it, and that is more than fair enough. Nintendo haven't really done anything overly major with this device as of yet, and instead either just updated Switch 1 games or released Switch 2 versions of Switch 1 games. 99% of the Switch 2 library at this point is just Switch 1 games or games you can play far better on another competition device that costs exactly the same. And that just isn't great for a console that's 6 months into its lifespan at this point. I am hoping and do genuinely believe that as time goes on, the Switch 2 will become just as great if not better than the Switch 1. I think that the hardware that makes both consoles unique has been fine-tuned a lot more with the Switch 2, allowing for a lot more to be done with it. This combined with the fact that it is now more powerful by a decent margin over the Switch 1 means that third-party support might just be a lot more lively now. Cyberpunk is a great example, intensive on every platform it is on. It has the new mouse controls as well as gyro aiming. Simple changes I know, but that novelty got me to pick up the game again. And it runs fantastic at 40 FPS in performance mode. It is upscaled by DLSS, sure, but it is good DLSS, like it actually looks very, very good. I would say it looks better than the Steam Deck, but runs slightly worse. I love how easy it is to just sit and play on my Switch. Plus, with new games on the horizon like Tomodachi Life 2 and Metroid Prime 4, this device is really going to start reeling in some people that are a bit apprehensive about upgrading at this current point. Me being an early adopter, I just had to have it, but I am a weird fucker that has the worst FOMO the planet has ever seen. For others, however, I can easily see why someone wouldn't want to invest just yet. Right now as it stands, the Switch 2 honestly stands at a solid 6. It just isn't worth spending over £400 that only really plays Switch 1 games but at a higher resolution. The only main exclusives being Pokemon games, well, like Pokemon ZA, which you can play on the Switch 1, or Mario Kart World, which you can play only on the Switch 2, but everything else you can either play it on like a Switch 1 or another console. Like, it's not really worth it. I would say wait until more games come out that really take advantage of the hardware and also are exclusives. Once it gets better, I would say that the Switch 2 could easily be an 8 or 9 out of 10, but as it stands there just isn't enough here to warrant me saying get a Switch 2 over a Switch 1. If the games that are released for this are right up your alley, however, and you've been looking for an excuse to invest, then more power to you. After all, I love it, but I wouldn't say it's a necessity. Last but not least on our list is the regular smartphone. As I say, there are tons of different types of phones out there that are different ages and price points, while also specialising in different things. Chances are, however, that most phones that are seen out in the world today will be able to run most games at a lower graphical settings preset. Not to mention the fact that with game streaming, the hardware inside of your phone can take a real backseat and relies more heavily on a stable internet connection instead. There really isn't much I can say to sell a mobile phone to you because, as I say, they are already so integrated into today's society and everyone has one. Hell, my nan that has to ring my mum every time something goes wrong with her printer has one. She could dive into Xbox Game Pass right now if she wanted. It is such a versatile platform that allows a lot of games from a lot of different eras and consoles to be played. It does require a bit of know-how to get started with the good stuff, but it is honestly really easy to learn. It took me no time at all to have it become second nature to me. Just look at what phone you have, as well as the specs, and judge what would fit you from there. Honestly, a solid 9 out of 10 for choice and accessibility. Definitely worth scrounging around to see what can suit you, as there are a lot of choices. Well, that covers pretty much everything. I can't really think of anything else I need to say that I haven't already said, so with that, I think it's time to conclude this video. Thank you. Honestly, really genuinely to God, thank you if you have made it this far. This has been a long ass video, and I know it is going to be a pain in the arse to edit, but it is worth it when I know that you lovely lot that watch these videos like what I have to say about these devices that I love to talk about. Hopefully, at the very least, you learned something today, or maybe if you were debating on getting one of these, I hope I helped you make a decision. If you have any questions about these devices, leave them in the comments. I'm sure either me or someone else less stupid than I am can answer them. But with this, however, I must bid you all farewell for now. All I can say is thank you once again, and that I hope you went on to enjoy this car crash of a video. Hopefully, the next one, you know, life shouldn't be coming at me too fast, and I might be able to sort of do something a bit more normal. But yes, depending on that will be, regardless, I hope I will see you then. Bye-bye, guys.